Okay, I have 3 different types of fabric I'm going to use for the outer part of the bag that we call the self. I have my back pattern piece here that I need to cut 1 out of. I also have the front, but it's only half a pattern piece, so I'll need to cut half and then make sure I flip it and cut the other half, or I can fold my fabric, but this is designed to be twice as big. Same with this bottom pattern piece. This is the piece that goes on the bottom of the bag. This is the fold line, so I can either fold my fabric and line it up and cut it out, and then it'll be, when I unfold it, it's twice as big, or I can cut half and flip it and cut the rest. I need 2 self fabric for my flap, so there's enough room here to cut 2. Maybe I will fold my fabric actually, and that way I can cut 2 at the same time, and then this little piece I can put on the fold, and I only need 1 of it cut on the fold, so it'll be twice as big as well. So that's what I'm gonna go ahead and do. Once you finish cutting out all of the self pattern pieces, you should also cut out interfacing and apply the interfacing to the back side of all the self pattern pieces. The fabric I'm using is really thick. It's overly thick, so it does not need interfacing. But if you're using like a quilting cotton or something that's not this pleather leather, you would definitely benefit cutting out some interfacing pattern pieces, and all you have to do is just iron it onto the back of each of the self pieces and you'll be good to go, and you'll be ready to cut out your lining. Here I'm cutting out my lining pieces. You need the front pattern piece, you need the back as well, and you also need the bottom. Those are the 3 essential pieces you need to cut lining out of. I also recommend any pockets that you want. There is a pattern piece for like a poofy patch pocket or a regular patch pocket, or even you can make a zipper pocket as well, which you'll see later in this video. That's what I end up doing, is putting in a lined zipper pocket, which is actually not as hard as you might think it sounds. So anyways, get all your lining pieces and you will be ready to start sewing. Okay, here I am cutting out my strap pieces. I didn't have enough fabric, so I patched it together. I sewed some leather scraps together so that it'd be long enough to cut out the straps. These are the straps for the backpack. It turned out it was really hard to sew these straps because this fabric is so incredibly thick. If I did this again, I would actually just buy twill tape 1 inch wide. I think it's just as cute and much easier. But anyways, that's what I'm doing now, is cutting out the 2 long backpack straps. You'll also need little backpack strap tabs, 2 of them. These are like the little tabs that are gonna hold the D-rings, that the straps go through the D-rings. They get sewn at the bottom of the bag. So small pattern piece, just need 2. Again, if you ended up buying twill tape, you would just use your twill tape, but I'm using my fabric, so I'm gonna have to fold it a couple times so that it ends up being 1 inch wide. So this pattern piece is for the little tabs that close the bag at the top. They'll be hidden underneath the flap. Again, it's probably easier just to find some twill tape. In another bag, I actually used an old shoelace, which worked out great because you can just tie it. I've also used like little Velcro or elastic straps as well and put Velcro on the end. You will eventually put Velcro on this piece as well. But here I'm cutting out leather tabs. And this again is for the closure of the top of the bag. So there's 2 of them, and it'll definitely need to be folded a lot as well. So I did regret using a thick fabric, to be honest with you. This is the little tab that's we're gonna put the magnetic snap on. It kind of folds like a little pleat. So that way, you know, the bag, the flap can kind of move around. That's why we use this tab instead of just putting the magnet directly on the bag. Having this little flap kind of gives it a little bit of wiggle room. And then here is the handle for the top of the bag. This is so handy when your backpack has a handle on it, I think. So again, if you're using twill tape's great. That way you don't have to fold it and sew it, but here I'm using the same self material and I will have to fold it and top stitch it and all that good stuff. So these are all the little trinkets that you could just use twill tape, or you can cut out your actual fabric and you'll just do a lot of folding and top stitching. To begin sewing, go ahead and grab the snap loop pattern piece. You're gonna fold right sides together the long way, and you're gonna sew along that long seam that's open, leaving the 2 short ones open so that you can turn it right side out. There we go, sewn together. Now I gotta flip it so the right side is out. Of course, I'm using thick material, so it's a little bit hard, but I don't give up, and it eventually does turn right side out. So it's a little poofy. I want it to lay flat, so I run it to the machine and I give it a top stitch as well, and that's gonna help it lay much flatter, as you can see. So next I'm gonna fold under those raw edges, and I'm gonna use that fold to stitch down to the front of the bag. There's little placement lines on the pattern piece. But before I do that, I want to apply my magnetic snap. So now is the perfect time to go ahead and grab that snap. It's the one with the protruding nipple is the one that's supposed to be on this piece. Mine, I just kind of like mark some little holes, and then I use my seam ripper to actually rip the fabric. I don't want it to rip too much, just enough to squeeze the little metal legs in, put in the backing, and then my snap bends pretty easy, so it was not hard to apply at all. Okay, next I'm gonna take that folded edged little snap loop, and I'm gonna put it on actually the front pattern piece. So this is an old paper pattern, don't read that paper pattern. But there are placement lines. Actually ended up putting a little bit lower on the new pattern that you guys probably have. And if you notice, I didn't sew it flat. See how it's kind of folded up? That's again to give it a little wiggle room for the flap. Next, I'm gonna put the other part of the snap on the flap. You only have to put it on one of the flap pieces. So it'll be hidden on the underside of the flap, and just put it on the same way that you put the other magnet on. Okay, now it's time to sew my flap pieces together. You're gonna put right sides together and sew around the edges. Make sure the top is left open. To make your flap look really nice and sharp, you should iron it. Unfortunately, I have very difficult material. It is so hard to iron, so I'm doing my best, and it melts. Hopefully you have material that's a little bit easier to work with, but I know if I press open that seam, it's gonna look so much sharper and cleaner, and it's totally worth doing it if you can. And then once you do it, then you'll turn it right side out and you'll give it another press as well. Okay, I'm turning it right side out. Just trying to push open all that seam allowance, get my seams right on that folded edge. I really want them to lay as flat as possible. So of course I'm gonna get the iron and press it as well. But I'm just trying to use my fingers to really roll it in place first and just give it a good press, add some steam, do what I can. This fabric is very difficult, so I know I'm probably gonna have to go back and give it a nice top stitch to really help it lay nice and flat. Yeah, it's still a little poofy, so I'm definitely gonna run it through a machine, give it that edge top stitch, and oh my gosh, so much flatter by just adding that stitch. So that's working out well. And the flap is finished. To finish it off, actually baste the top opening so that it doesn't kind of wiggle out of place. You will sew it later to the bag, so it's a good idea to baste the top once you flip it open. Okay, now it's time to do that handle. Again, if you have twill tape, you don't have to do this part. You can just cut your 1-inch wide twill tape the length of this handle, but I don't, so I'm folding over on this teeny 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm gonna also do the bottom one, and I'm gonna fold it in half. That way there'll be no seam allowance, no raw edges showing. But gosh, trying to do that double fold, and it's not the best with this material, but hey, I did what I could. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, this was really hard to sew. I should have used a Teflon foot on my machine. I don't know where it is. I'm gonna go buy a new one, but they're like these white plastic feet that helps sticky fabric kind of slide through better. But I definitely struggled, but I somehow managed. So now it's time to put it on the flap. There are placement lines on the pattern piece to help you. Just lay it there, baste it, make sure the handle's not twisted. And now you're ready to do the straps. Again, kind of wish I bought 1-inch wide twill tape. It would have been a lot easier, but I'm going all in here and I'm using this difficult material, folding it twice, gonna give it that top stitch. Yeah. Once the straps are done, go ahead and place them right next to the handle and baste them into place. Take the back band, go ahead and fold it right sides together along the middle line and sew around it. Leave an opening at the top so you can flip it. Try to give it a good press, and then you're gonna place it on top of where the handles are on the flap, sewing it to the back side, the back pattern piece as well. I'm just gonna give it an edge stitch all the way around. This will really secure the flap, the handle, the straps, and cover up all the raw edges as well. Okay, now it's time to prepare those little strap tabs. Again, if you don't have twill tape, you can just take your fabric and fold under those raw edges, fold it again so there's no raw edges showing, so that the strap's only 1 inch wide at the end. And then grab a D-ring and you'll slide it through your D-ring once you finish sewing it. And so slide it through the D-ring, and then you're just gonna sew it to itself. So you're basically looping it around the D-ring. If you have fabric that frays a lot, you could fold under that little raw edge. My fabric's not fraying, so I just folded it once. My fabric's so ridiculously thick, that was easier for my machine. Once they're ready, go ahead and place them on the back pattern piece. There are little dots, but really it should just be straight below where the straps are, honestly. And baste them across. Okay, they're basted in, they are ready to go. Okay, now let's sew those side seams. So grab the front pattern piece and line up the side seam on the back. You'll notice the back is wider, so that's totally fine, but just get the edges of the side seam lined up and stitch them together, 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, this part's pretty difficult. Now we're gonna sew the bottom of the bag on. Why it's hard is because you're sewing a curve to like a straight seam. So look for the notches on the pattern on how to line up the front. There's a little notches on the bottom pattern piece. They're not shown in this video, but I added them later because this was so hard. Another trick is to put in a 1/2 inch stay stitch all the way around, not the bottom piece that's curved, but the front and back piece that aren't curved. So 1/2 inch stay stitch along the edge, and then that way you can clip your seam allowance so it can spread open. The reason why this is hard is because the sew line is exactly the same length on the front and back compared to the bottom. It's just that when you add seam allowance, because the bottom is a curve shape, the seam allowance is gonna be wider around a curve. So when you try to line up those raw edges, the bottom has more fabric than the front and back pieces do, but the sew line is exactly the same length. So you have to snip the seam allowance on the front and back so they can kind of spread open to match the raw edge on the bottom pattern piece. I think I do a better job explaining this on the video of the Easy bag where I just use cotton fabric. So if you want to watch that, maybe that'll make more sense. But yeah, just pin into place and just clip in the seam allowance on the front and back, and that should help it fit. Also use those notches that are on the bottom pattern piece to line it up to the front and back like side seams. That should help as well. And when you're ready, take it to the sewing machine and sew with that 1/2 inch wide seam allowance. Great, we have a bag here. Here it is. Okay, so now we're gonna get those little tabs for the inside. They're actually gonna close the bag, so you can prepare them yourself, or you can grab anything else. I'm kind of over sewing these tabs, so I grabbed some elastic. You do have to fold it in half. They're double the length. I did not realize that at the time, so mine are too long, so I ended up just cutting them later to be half as like the length being a little bit shorter. We're gonna sew some Velcro on it so they can close. Again, if you don't have Velcro, you could just leave them extra long and then just like hand tie a bow or something. That's another idea as well. And that's actually what I do in the other video I made of the more simple version too. Line up the raw edges, baste it straight across. See how long that is? I ended up cutting that so it's much shorter. Okay, we're turning this guy right side out. And then we get to go focus on the lining. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and sew in a 7-inch pocket. I'm just gonna draw a cut line that's 7 inches. And I'm gonna make the whole space a total of 1/2 inch wide. So that's gonna be a fold line, that's a 1/4 inch there. And I'm marking another 1/4 inch. Probably best to use chalk to mark this. Okay, my zipper is much bigger, but that's okay. After I sew it in, I can cut it. Not a big deal. Now for the lining, I'm gonna want lining that is a little bit wider than 7 inches, okay? And then depends how long I want the pocket. If I want it like this big, then I would double this length. So it looks like I'm kind of looking at 7 inches, so I'll make it 14 inches by 9 inches is what my pocket bag lining is gonna be, 14 by 9. Okay, so my lining is 9 inches wide, which is more than 7 inches, and 14 inches long. When it's done, it'll be like sewn like this, but on the back side. So what we're gonna do is put right sides together here, and then make sure there's a little bit extra above the square. I can kind of see it through my fabric. I'm gonna mark it on this side of my fabric. And that's going to be my sew line. I'm gonna go ahead and sew on this blue square, sewing the two right sides together. So you're looking at the wrong side of the lining here. Right side of the fabric, right side of the lining should be facing each other. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and sew this box. Okay, I sewed the lining, pocket lining to my lining piece. Now to cut it, I wanna really snip in that corner. Okay, so where I'm drawing those pencil lines, that's where I'm gonna cut so that I have a nice triangle fabric that I can fold to the other side. So there won't be raw edge showing at that edge. And then I'm also gonna cut straight along this line. When I get to the other side, again, I really want to leave a nice big triangle of fabric. Okay, so that's what I'm gonna cut. Here I go, cutting through both layers. Now I'm going to put the pocket lining inside the pocket. All of it. I'm going to want to give it a good press as well with the iron. I'm going to try to open this up. I'm pressing my fingers. I'll press it with iron as well. Just really want it nice and sharp. Okay, great. Ready to put the zipper in. There we go. And we're essentially just gonna edge stitch around this box to catch the zipper tape. So if you wanna pin it, pin it. Sometimes I like to use Scotch tape to hold the zipper as I sew. All right, well, I managed to sew crooked. I think I just don't like the zipper foot I have on my current home machine. I need to get a new one because it's terrible. But it's still in there at least. It's gonna be in the lining, so I don't really care. And people always ask me, you sew over the zipper teeth? I actually do. I make sure not to break my needle though. I don't use the presser foot, I actually use the hand wheel as I go over them. But then because I do that, when I'm done, I can actually cut off the zipper tape. Okay, let's see. Yay, we have a zipper. Okay, so the very last step, just fold up the pocket, and I'm just gonna go ahead and sew my pocket bag. The two edges, and I'll just sew the bottom because it's folded. I'll sew the top together, and also the other edges, leaving my lining piece free. And then when I'm done, I will have a nice little pocket bag. White thread on the bottom, red thread on the top, but there we go. Nice, right? Beautiful. Next step is to take your front lining piece and line it up to the side seams of the back. Again, the front's longer, that's fine. It's designed that way. And you're just gonna sew straight down both side seams, leaving the bottom open because later we'll sew the bottom piece at the bottom. But for now, just sew the two side seams right sides together, 1/2 inch seam allowance. taking our bottom piece and sewing it, clipping wherever necessary. So same tips to sew the bottom that I mentioned when you did on the self fabric is look for the notches on the pattern piece. It'll make it much easier to line up. Also, before you pin the bottom, it's probably a good idea to put in a stay stitch around the sew line on the front and back piece, just sewing 1/2 inch from the raw edge. That way you can clip into the seam allowance on the front and back, and that'll help the seam allowance spread so that it can fit around the curved bottom piece a little bit better. But pin it together and sew it at 1/2 inch seam allowance, and that's the goal. Okay, I have the bottom sewn on the lining. I'm just gonna leave it inside out. This is the fun part. Now we're gonna put the self bag inside the lining. We're gonna make sure the flap is in the lining, the straps are in the lining, everything is hidden inside the lining. So squeeze that guy in and line up the opening edges, get all the tabs, everything inside that lining. Line up your side seams so they match, and you're gonna sew around the whole opening, all the way around. Nothing should be sticking out. Once you finish pinning it, take it to the sewing machine. The seam allowance is 1/2 inch, and so start at one spot and just sew all the way around until you get to the part where you started. Okay, here we go. I sewed all the way around. Now I have to turn it right side out. I did not leave an opening, so I just grabbed my seam ripper. I opened up a little opening on the side seam. That way I can now flip my bag out. Great. I could flip the lining right side out as well. And then I could put the lining inside the bag. So here we go. This is the magical moment. This is the most exciting part. I love this part. There's no raw edges showing. Everything is hidden. Ooh, there we go. Okay, so before we close up that little hole that we made in the lining, now's a great time to put the cardboard inside your bag. So I cut off the seam allowance because we are not gonna sew the cardboard today. So just make sure the cardboard does not have seam allowance on it. So it's easier for me to just cut it off my pattern piece. And then I use that to trace. I just found an old Amazon Prime cardboard box, cut it out, and then stick it through that hole and place it on the very bottom pattern piece. And nothing really secures it. It just kind of fits there and stays there. Once that's secure, now you can go ahead and close up that hole. I just did a top stitch actually. And then one thing that I don't know what happened to the video where it went, but I ended up sewing a top stitch around the opening. You can kind of see the little red stitch at the opening of the bag. Again, my fabric was so difficult and poofy that you could do an understitch if you don't like the look of a top stitch. That's where you sew the seam allowance to the lining. Or you can just iron it really well and do nothing, but my bag did well with a top stitch. Then I went ahead and I put the sliders on and I looped the straps through the D-rings and I ended up sewing the straps to itself. I have like another video I can show you that I walk through that part a little bit slower. as well. And then at the end, I thought it'd be nice to add an extra tab. The pattern didn't call for this, but since my fabric was so stiff, I thought it needed it. And that's it, we're done.